G'day guys, Mac with the Our Circle. Today I want to talk about the different Primarchs in the Horus Heresy and what's the best sort of traits that they bring to the tabletop. Now, there's no perfect answer to this, but I do have a preferred type of Primarch out of the three types listed. I've also included the Primarchs that haven't yet released in this and where I think they'll end up in this spectrum of Primarchs. So, the three different types I've come up with are the Solo Monster. This prefers to the sort of Primarchs which are more selfish. They have very few army buffing rules, if any at all. Essentially minor things like slightly better leadership or something of that nature. They don't really make everything better for their presence. These sort of Primarchs are the kind that you just throw at the enemy and they basically earn their points back by killing things. The second type of Primarchs are the All-Rounders, the biggest category. These are Primarchs who are solid fighters, but they also bring a bit to the table for their force, usually unlocking different slots of troops, different unit types, or buffing unit entries, such as allowing whole types of units like all Terminators to deep strike. The final category is the army buffing type, and these units have a way of making multiple different units across their army better at the same time, quite a lot of those units. However, they lack the sheer combat prowess of the other Primarchs, which is why they've gone down to this tier. That said, they'll still hold their own in a fight, just not as well. So, what is the best type of Primarch to have? Well, on the surface, probably the all-rounder, but it's not that simple. Something can be said for all of these Primarchs. For example, Angron has the ability to challenge as many models as he has attacks. You get charged by multiple units, he can single out the sergeants of each of those units and kill them. That's handy. The ability of also having 10 attacks base, plus whatever he gains from charging, is huge. So he can reliably be thrown at units like Terminators and kill most of them off before they even have a chance to strike at him, and what's left are going to struggle to hurt the guy. That's got its bonuses. Fulgrim's ability to pick a Warlord trait. Not huge for the army as a whole, but the fact is he's still picking a Warlord trait, and that's big. And hand to hand, he can take on most Primarchs and come out on top. Obviously some, like Leman Russ or Horus, are better. A fully charged up Angron with 10 attacks will take him down, but that's practically it. He's a very hard Primarch to kill when using Fireblade. Of course, Magnus the Red. You put him on the table, he can have a D strength and Nova ability which can decimate units all over the tabletop because he doesn't need line of sight to them, especially deadly in things like Zone Mortalis or tables with a lot of line of sight blocking terrain. But that doesn't really help his army out apart from him just killing things to earn back his own points. So the solo monsters, they do have their place, but the problem is they're limited to what they can personally kill. Magnus having the ability to hit a wide area of the table is fantastic. Same as Conrad Kurz, he has the speed that the other Primarchs lack to get from point A to point B. I think Jagatai Khan fits in here because he'll be a Primarch which doesn't offer much to his Legion, just a few minor, more insignificant buffs, but Jagatai will have the ability to get around very quickly on a jet bike, I dare say. Just an educated guess, we'll call it. Now the All-Rounders. As said before, these guys can hold their own in a fight, but most of them will struggle against the solo monsters. The solo monsters bring things to the fight which allow them an edge in a lot of areas. For Vulcan, it's his resilience. For Magnus the Red, it's his psychic abilities. For Angron, the sheer amount of attacks. Conrad Kurz's ways of being able to hit and run. And, of course, Fulgrim, because he can just dance rings around his opponents. That said, the All-Rounders have ways of using tactics and strategy to buff their armies. Making Terminators troops, giving all their Terminators deep strike, no scattered deep strikes. They have versatility, essentially. You're not relying on them solely to do all the damage themselves to an enemy faction. Instead, the Primarch is able to buff the army to some extent. Now this often means that the lists can be tailored around this, but the lists also become predictable. If you have Ferrus Manus, yes, he can make tanks stronger by giving them it will not die, but you also know he's more likely to bring tanks or dreadnoughts to his army. Mortarion, same sort of deal. Yeah, okay, missile launchers gain poison, for example. That's great, but missile launchers aren't the best weapons in the heresy, so you're probably not going to see too many of them around. Leman Russ and Perturabo both have bonuses for Terminators, but you kind of expect those Primarchs to bring a lot of Terminators, and you'll act accordingly with Plasma and things like that to take them down. Lionel Johnson and Sanguinius. I pop them in the all-rounder category because I think that as Primarchs who are incredibly skilled combatants, like Angron or Fulgrim, but also leaders, more so than those are, they will probably end up being the sort of Primarchs that will make good all-rounders. Lionel Johnson is very similar to Rabute Gilliman in that he'll have tactical abilities, I dare say, because that's his thing. In the books, he's quiet, brooding, incredibly skilled combatant, and tactically on the ball. Him and Gilliman both find that they're very similar in their tactical abilities, which is, speaks a lot of Lionel Johnson in his favour. Sanguinius, he's more of an inspirational Primarch, a leader who will buff the troops around him in different ways. So where Lionel Johnson will give probably things like deep strikes or outflanking, Sanguinius will just give flat out buffs like maybe Furious Charge or something to that effect to his forces. So I think they belong in the all-rounder category, because they're definitely not going to be units that buff their whole armies. Instead, they'll just make units near them better. Now, the army buffing Primarchs. These are the weakest of the Primarchs. Still very dangerous, but they're not the kind of Primarchs you'll willingly throw into combat with other Primarchs. Instead, their strengths lie in what they bring to your army as a whole. And because of this, I think they're the strongest Primarchs. They're usually cheaper than the opposition, and they bring more to the table. The problem, as I say, with the all-rounders is they don't need to kill the enemy to get their points back, but they still do need to have some sort of battlefield presence. The army buffing Primarchs don't need to at all. They hardly even have to participate in the game. They just do so much for their armies that they're just better. Alfarius is the best example of this, because he gives his whole army preferred enemy. Now, preferred enemy is the strongest rule in 30k, I think, because there's no nation, no fear, or anything like that. Preferred enemy, the ability to reroll ones, to hit, to wound in close combat is just huge. To do it with shooting as well, and the weapons in Heresy are very deadly in the shooting gallery. So you've also got to remember, these buffing Primarchs that buff multiple units across their whole army, they're not restricted to just Terminators or just Tactical Marines. They can do a whole spectrum of units. Rogel Dawn has the ability to make 3 different fortifications on the battlefield have better cover saves for the units within, and also to buff them with re-rolling failed pinning checks and such. So that's good versatility, and it scales so efficiently. Like 2,000 points of Alpha Legion with preferred enemy is scary. 6,000 points of Alpha Legion with preferred enemy is fucking terrifying. So Alfarius doesn't even need to take to the battlefield as such. He can just sit there disguised in a unit all day. He doesn't have to run out like Angron does to get his 300 points back. Angron, I think, is 375 off the top of my head, or 400. It's not a huge amount, but he still needs to get out there and kill about 20 Terminators to get his points back. Alfarius doesn't need to do that. Alfarius just rocks up to the battle, and his army is just better for him being there. And I think that's more important. Yeah, okay, Leman Russ, Horus the Warmaster, Perturabo, they're 3 of the strongest Primarchs. Along with Magnus the Red, they're probably the best 4 Primarchs. But they only improve a couple of units, and they're very deadly themselves, but when they're facing up against a whole army, like preferred enemy Alpha Legion, they're not going to win. They're not going to win. And if they do, it's because something's gone very wrong for the Alpha Legion, probably related to the dice, or, you could be a potato of a player, there's plenty out there. Of course, Lorgar, same sort of thing. He basically turns the Word Bearers into just an unbreakable faction. The whole army is just better for having him, and he himself is no slouch. With his psychic powers, he can be an incredibly terrifying opponent. So, take it with a grain of salt, my opinions on today's episode, but all in all, I think that the Primarchs who bring more to the table for the army are superior to the Primarchs who themselves are just deadly. Now, does that mean they're going to win you games on their own? No, it doesn't. It's never that easy. Magnus the Red throwing a bucket load of dice at blasting Novas in the middle of a table is probably going to ruin most people's day. It's going to be very hard to shut him down. But, as I say, Alfarius, giving the whole army a preferred enemy, they could do it. They could take down the Crimson King. Anyway, I'm back with the Outer Circle. Hope you like my opinions in this episode. I mean, it's just an opinion. If I'm wrong, or you think someone else has it better, or I've mixed up the categories and who belongs where, please let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know what you think of my predictions for Jagged-Eye, the Lion, and Sanguinius. Do you think I'm right in where they lie in this sort of spectrum, or am I wrong? Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next time.